Okay, so let's go down the copyright and royalty track a little bit.
Sure.
First of all, I'm going to ask you to sort of talk about what copyright means, and then I'd like you to sort of break apart what is meant by the mechanical right and the performance right. So, first of all, what is copyright?
I mean, you know, it is what it says on the tin. It's the right to copy, basically, and you know, there is an intellectual property involved in terms of you writing, composing, or making something. Okay, and that when you want it duplicated, you can give that right to somebody else, but you own that copyright in the first instance, and then you're giving that. So a publisher, for example, if you do a publishing deal, you're giving them the right. Okay, and then they can use that music or exploit that music, or a record company can exploit that music. So that's basically what copyright is.
Yeah, and that copyright process, when does that actually occur? Is it at the point where something is actually, it's fixed, isn't it, in some way?
Well,
is that right?
It's that point when it's actually made.
It's at the point where
so
it's made.
you own that copyright, as long as it's original, obviously, from the moment it's made.
And a lot of people ask, do I have to send a version of it to myself in order for it to be, I need to pay somebody like a website to register it for me? It's not the case,
is it? Pre the digital revolution, people used to either send a copy of the recording back to themselves, so it had a Royal Mail date stamp,
right,
which was
a sealed envelope with a date stamp
exactly.
on it.
So that proved that and if you hadn't opened it, or you'd send it to your lawyers, a copy of the version, and they'd keep it sealed. But nowadays, with digital, I mean, an email and any sort of electronic tagging of a date should suffice in terms of copyright.
And so the copyright happens at the point you create it. It belongs to you, but you can give it to someone else, like a publisher. But you're still recognised as the owner, aren't you?
Yes and no, because it depends on what you do with it. So some people do sell their songs, and you can.
Right.
In which case, then whoever buys it will own the copyright. In terms of publishing, you're basically leasing it for amount of time.
Yeah.
And then usually within that, like a 2 or 3 year period, whatever your deal is, you get the copyright back. But there are things called retention periods, which I'm sure we'll go into later.
Yeah.
But then there are instances where whoever is using that music or buys that music can use it in what we call perpetuity, which is basically forever. So there's different ways of sort of defining who owns it, because it depends on what you're doing with it. So if you wrote a piece of music and never exploited it, you'll own that forever, right? But if you assign it to somebody else, then there's a period that it goes to somebody else.
Okay. And it's important to also recognise that there are two quite distinct types of right inherent in the copyright, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because I could write a song, but you could then sing it and make a recording of it. And therefore, how do you explain that? What are the two different types?
So that's the difference between publishing and recording, basically. There are two distinct sort of rights here. You've got the performance rights, you've got the mechanical rights. And the mechanical is usually owned by a record company and or an artist. And on the other side, you've got the performance right, which is basically either the publisher or the composer.
Right. So if I take someone else's song and make a recording of it, I can benefit from some mechanical royalties at some point.
Exactly.
If it generates income. And if I write the song myself, I benefit from the performance royalties, but some of those performance royalties come from the recording as well.
Yeah, so this is great when people do cover versions because then the composer makes money because...
Well, they haven't had to do anything.
They haven't had to do anything, but it's very important that on the mechanical side, on the recording side, that, when you go into a studio and you record something, it actually becomes property of the recording studio. Yeah. Now that's why you have to do a deal saying that I'm going to pay you to record in your studio, and in return I own the recording. So it's very important that you do that.
So it's an important distinction to make, that the person who resources or pays for the process of recording is the owner of what is effectively known as the master.
The master, exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So just picking up from that, let's talk about some of the ways in which royalties can be collected, some of the ways that these songs can actually make money for people.
So we've talked about the mechanical and performance. So basically performance is live, it's radio, it's any time that you actually listen to it. Mechanical is the actual sale of the physical product, or not so much nowadays in digital products as well. Then we go into streaming as another source, which is obviously very big now, or getting bigger.
Streaming.
Yeah.
An interesting one when it comes to copyright and royalties. Clearly a lot of stuff up in the air at the moment, but fundamentally, would you agree that it's primarily a performance right?
Yeah, I think it depends on whether you own that piece of music or not. And so downloading, I think that's you're owning it.
You can have it.
You can transfer it to other media. You can play it anywhere. Whereas streaming, ordinarily, like YouTube or something like that, you listen to it that once, but you don't really own that piece of music. You're just listening to it. Mm-hmm. So there is a distinction there between downloading and streaming.
Yep.
And the other way of making money from music is obviously sync. Now that's a big thing these days, because a lot of people want to get into it because of the actual money that you can make within that world. And that is the art of putting music to video or to a moving picture.
Okay. And is there largely, is it largely a sought after market because there's a combination of a fee, part of a fee that you can get for it, as well as this nice royalty if your music appears on TV or film?
Well, in my experience, a lot of bands or people that have been in bands and artists want to get into sync nowadays because, if you think about the good old days when, you could make a lot of money from the actual sale of a CD or an album, with the advent of the digital revolution, so we say, that's become a lot harder because sales are going down. So, composers are looking at other ways of making money. So they're looking at sync because, as you say, there's two sort of elements there. You can get an upfront fee for the actual licensing of that music, and then you can get royalties from every time that piece of music is played either on the radio or TV or wherever you've synced it to.
And thinking about television, obviously, there's been a recent exponential growth in the amount of channels. You only have to switch your TV on today and you see there's hundreds and hundreds of channels. Now, combine that by all the hundreds of territories worldwide, and you can imagine a composer makes a piece of music for a TV show, and it goes on and on and on to be broadcast in loads of territories. Hence, somebody like yourself, with your skills of working out where the money needs to be tracked and so on, is quite important.
It's very important, but there's a misnomer here. People do think that because you've got your music into a TV program and it's on 300 channels, you have to be very careful because the income from the performance side of things really depends on that channel and whether it's licensed properly, whether there's enough income coming from that license to the PRO that they will pay per play, or they will pay, because sometimes there's this thing called sampling.
Yeah.
And they will sample various days, the PROs will sample various days instead of, let me just explain that. So for Radio 1, for terrestrial TV, PRS will basically pay for everything that's played on those channels or on that radio station.
Right, like the program, for instance, has a cue sheet of exactly all the songs or the music played, and each one of those is matched and paid out.
Yeah, so there's a playlist and there's a cue sheet,
and
that's what they use to pay out on. But for example, Sky or Discovery or one of the bigger channels, the US channels, they've got lots of little affiliated channels, which, if we really want to get into this, the way it works is that the PRS will look at the TV company, sort of the broadcaster will come to the PRS and say, we're going to start off this new channel, okay? And we want to be able to play music on it. So the PRS will say, well, how much music are you going to play? So we say, we don't know yet. So usually within a year or two of the channel starting, the channel has a good idea of how much music's been used, and the PRS do, because through cue sheets, etc. And it's also the licenses based upon the viewership, the amount of viewers, whether it's paid for TV or not. There's lots of different factors involved. So once that amount of money is settled between the broadcaster and the PRS, they pay. So, but that could be £100,000. Now, £100,000 over a year of a TV channel, and you wanting to get your £5 or £10 per play is not going to happen. So what PRS do is they sample days dependent on how much money they're getting back through, and advertising as well, advertising fees, the viewership, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of different things that have to happen, or PRS have got to calculate, and then there's a fee, and then there's money coming in. So it's there's not always a sure thing that you're going to get paid for your one play on one show.
I understand the point you're making.
Yeah.
Right.